Welcome to B2B Marketing Methods. I'm your host, Terri Hoffman, and I'm the CEO of Marketing Refresh. Let's face it, embracing digital marketing is daunting. This podcast was created to make it more approachable. Join me as we talk to CEOs, sales leaders, and revenue growth experts who will share lessons learned and tips from their own journeys. Welcome everyone today to another episode of B2B Marketing Methods. I'm excited today to have a guest with me. Her name is Heidi Hattendorf. Heidi is the founder and executive marketer who does consulting work for her business called Transformation Insights. And I am going to have Heidi introduce herself in a little bit more detail in a minute, but I wanted to highlight some of the things we're going to be talking about in our podcast interview today. So we're going to be talking about just how marketing has changed, how it's been evolving. I mean, this year in particular has been pretty big. And one of the reasons it's been changing is because of AI. And so we're going to be talking about how AI has impacted the marketing industry, how companies can begin to embrace their use of AI in sales and marketing and go-to-market strategies. We're also going to be talking about the concept of ROI, or return on your marketing investment, how that can play into your budgeting. So it's the end of 2024 right now during this date of recording. And it's the time of year when brands are beginning to think about budgeting for 2025. So we're going to spend some time talking about processes and ways that you can formulate your marketing budget. We're also going to be talking about best practices for go-to-market strategies. So I've emphasized some of Heidi's marketing consulting capabilities, but in a broader sense, she also has a lot to add on the sales side. So the entire more holistic go-to-marketing strategy, we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to also talk about what she's hearing in the market and some of the lessons learned and best practices, what her clients are talking to her about. So I think it's going to be a really educational, fun episode. Heidi, thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Terri. Thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's such an important topic all around.
Yeah, everything that we're going to talk about today, these are all the hot buttons, right? That prospects I'm talking to are bringing up, other marketers that I know. These are all just really important things to talk through, and I can't wait to get your perspective on them. I'd love it if you can begin the interview by just introducing yourself with a little bit more detail. How did you get your
Sure,
career in
happy
marketing
to.
started, and how did you end up where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the founder and lead for Transformation Insights, and we're a consulting company and business advisory that primarily works with smaller companies looking to grow and scale. And in particular, we focus on the positioning and the messaging, really getting that right, which then translates into very powerful go-to-market plays that are right for that business. I'm finding a lot of customers are just overwhelmed on so many different ways to go to market, so many things that can be done, but what's really right for their business and for their market. So I bring a career of leading marketing teams, executive roles, vice president of marketing, CMO, product marketing roles. I worked for a large company, Motorola, both on the cellular and also on the public safety side. And then a couple of medium-sized SaaS companies where really the VC backed, really the goal there was growth, expanding, let's say, into new verticals, into new different types of markets. I've now brought all of that executive experience into being able to help package that up and serve clients and be able to help them with their own growth plans. So it's absolutely been a really exciting time. I specialize in B2B, and in all cases, there's just always some really great learnings and some great results that we always get.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really good background because, like you said, that all of these different areas of practice are beginning to like merge together, and the lines are getting pretty gray. And then at the time they're getting gray, it's like, does it matter that they're getting gray, or should we all be embracing how sales and marketing and customer success and operations are fusing together, right? It can actually be a positive thing as long as there's some good oversight from the leadership team. Like, what do you experience in that regard on how these roles are evolving?
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think the biggest change is that it's no longer in serial, that let's say marketing sets something up and then hands over to sales. And then there's a happy customer, which then goes to customer success. I mean, it just is a very sequential type process. And there's no need for that now. It's really more of how can we rally teams around, let's say, the same metrics, the same KPIs, which at the end of the day is really about helping serve that customer, helping them get the results that they want to get within their business. And so you mentioned too about like some of the strategies and about AI making such a difference. I mean, one of the great ways that that can happen is by mining more information. So we have more information than ever about our prospects and about our customers. And then it's really a matter of how are we using that information. So that's what I find really exciting as well, is that it's one of the reasons why we no longer have to have these silos, but we can bring teams together, let's say around the same dashboards, around the same data metrics, around the same campaigns, and then together watch for the results and together try to improve on those and make it a better customer experience overall.
Yeah, the whole scenario you just described. What's one way that you see an organization successfully setting up that structure and accountability, even just starting there, how the KPIs are set? Where does that start? What are some of the keys to making sure that that's set up the right way?
The accountability is critical, and also just having the right data and the right KPIs or measures. It's one of those things where we have so much data that it can be taken so far. Next thing you know, we're just so busy pulling together dashboards, analyzing the data. Next thing, we're really losing sight. There's a potential to lose sight of what the customer really wants and where the market's headed. So I always recommend, and what I've seen it most successfully done is having a few core KPIs or measures. And it's different for every company, but it's going to probably be something around conversion, like what's actually converting into real business, what's the lifetime value of a customer, not just what's happening short term.
Yeah.
Profitability is becoming much more appreciated. I think the days of just growth at any cost are certainly gone. And it's much more about profitability so that the company has money to reinvest and to be able to expand more responsibly. So, those are a few key areas. But I also think like the personalization and being able to reach out to the market so that the message resonates. You're going to hear over and over about quality over quantity, less is more. So companies are just getting fatigued with trying to go across all of these different channels and having so many teams involved in so many different areas. So how can they get the most out of the go-to-market plays that they've chosen? So really in summary, I would say it's a few key measures, having the right channels and the right go-to-market place for their market, and then the personalization, and then together looking at some of those metrics and adjusting course from there.
Yeah. How do you track all of this? Are you typically advising your clients to be committed to a CRM tool or a marketing automation tool? What are your best practices that you advise?
There's so many tools out there, especially then with AI and with automation, much better ways to stitch together the marketing stack than ever before. I think for
Mhm.
too long, companies had to themselves become such MarTech and sales ops experts to be able to connect. But let's assume that some of that is connected. So, yeah, definitely leveraging CRM, but also marketing automation on the front end of that, and then being able to easily get the results that you're looking for to be able to measure. So simple dashboards. I think a lot of companies got caught up in just very complex dashboards. They weren't even sure what they were seeing. Could they trust the data? Really trusting the data and then being able to, let's say, have the clean data, have the data governance is another big one. Because otherwise, you're always going through a cleaning exercise, but it's more about how are you going to instill simple things like the customer's the same name. It's always entered that way. If you're using a CRM, is there a diligence where teams are updating? What can be automated so the teams don't manually have to update? Can that pull from email or from meetings? So take away some of that manual burden so that the data is cleaner and that you trust the data. And that always have a human oversight, right? Does this even make sense? Does this
Yeah.
pass the logic test? But get it into good shape that way. So those are some best practices, but I always think it's really about like let the bots do what they can do, let the automation AI do what it can do, and leave the humans to that human side. There's always going to be that human interaction, the decision making, and that's really where you can help the teams the most. So that's what I've been seeing.
You've talked a lot about AI. Are there certain functional areas or skill areas where you see AI making a bigger impact? I think a lot of the things that you see in blogs and things that might show up to a business owner or a leadership group's feed is like, oh, AI can do all the writing for you. It can do the sales outreach for you. It can do design and put a whole website together. My skeptical hat gets turned on when I see those things. But like from your perspective and experience, what areas are you seeing AI like really making the most impact?
I feel like these extremes of, oh, AI is going to replace all of these different functions. And then people feel like they're putting their head in the sand if they don't just jump onto that bandwagon, all the way to it's going to have no impact, right? And we know that the answer is somewhere in between, and it really depends. But I think to your point, like the most critical is what can be automated, looking at what are these manual repetitive tasks. It's like
Yeah.
redoing the plumbing every time and the connectors just doesn't make sense. Then when you come to things like writing, why not AI assisted to help create, let's say, the outline or the flow, or pulling some research notes or quotes? It's again a matter of degree. So when people think that all of the writing can be done, and then it's all going to look the same. It's just regurgitated, and it's not going to really stand out. No, if it's just to get across some of the basic information and then you build on it, that's different. But that's where the nuanced and the true human side about understanding the brand, understanding the problem statements that customer is experiencing, being able to tell that story.
Yeah.
You just can't get that with reformatted text. And that's where I think companies are maybe have indexed a little too far. You can already see it starting to come back to like the human touch, some human style in there. So to answer your question, it's really in between. But yeah, I absolutely think there's a role for AI in helping assist with that, helping on automation. Analytics is key. Why should somebody have to crunch? I remember how long it used to take teams at quarter end or year end to come up with just being able to track. Why, of course, that should be in real time. And we're seeing more of that with the tools that are out there. And then moving from just pure data insights into predictive. Okay, so
Yeah.
what is that telling us? And what does that now inform on where we should go next? But again, still having some human common sense overlay into, does this make business sense? Because we still want to really be the ones directing and understanding the business. So those are a couple of examples that I look towards on AI and
Yeah.
that I help companies with.
Have you seen the HubSpot release about what they've just announced at the Inbound conference? They added a whole new AI engine called Breeze.
I think that's one company that's really embraced things like the personalization, ease of workflow, connecting up the information, just really trying to simplify and make the B2B workflow work. So yeah, it's an excellent example.
Yeah. When you talk about a workflow in the B2B space, like, could you break down an example? I want this all to feel more approachable for
Yeah.
executives, and they might be sales executives or business executives who just don't really know that much about digital marketing. And this podcast is a platform for them to learn and to get educated so that it's more approachable and more something that they could potentially act on. But could you even just explain what a workflow is and give an example of how a workflow functions?
Yeah, of course. And I think too, for so long, you've heard sales and marketing teams saying people don't even realize what goes into it. But the good news is that's becoming more simplified with these modernized tools. But think of a workflow as like an end to end. So let's just say, for example, launching a new product and we want to get the word out. So a workflow for that could be first, let's do an announcement. There could be email that goes out through the CRM. So it's a certain segment of that contact list. There could be a webinar being announced to help with that promotion. And so all of this is tied together. There's probably a landing page that gets tied, possibly ads, let's say through LinkedIn. So the workflow is really all the steps in the sequence to be able to make that happen. So what I just described on a launch, a webinar, ads, those are actually separate. Those could even be separate workflows in and of themselves,
Yeah.
but they're connected in that what you see from someone watched an ad, and then maybe we're going to send them the webinar link. And it's the connection that's that much more important today. That used to be done manually. Somebody had to look at those names and then port this list over there. It's connected. And also for lead scoring, like how often was somebody on your website, how interested, so things like intent. Are they just looking, or are they downloading some assets? Are they registering for your webinar? So even though the workflow is literal about how you set this up, it's also really talking about the buyer's journey. And as we're learning more about that buyer as they go through and experience from your website, download assets, show up at different events, you can really start to understand the picture about, is there an interest, is there intent, so that when a salesperson then engages, they've got that much more information. And the same with the buyer, they've got that much more information about the company. So it's a more powerful exchange.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was a great breakdown. Really helpful. I think we're just so good as marketers about using all of our lingo and all of our go-to-market lingo. And honestly, I will talk to people and I can tell like they're smart enough to understand what I'm talking about, but they don't know our vocabulary, right? So I want to make sure that we're connecting the dots on a marketer's vocabulary so that the business person who is ultimately accountable for the results and the budget management and making sure that there is a return, like the more that they can learn about all of our terminology, I think it breaks down those walls and makes it feel so much more tangible because there's a lot of value a go-to-market team can add, and it's just critical to me, like the soapbox I'm standing on from here until I see a big change is embrace it. Like this isn't that difficult, but at the same time, there is so much information that your marketing and sales team knows about your clients that can be tracked and broken
Yeah.
down into really important metrics the same way your CFO and controller can look at the financial performance of your company and tell you such important data points. Like that mindset needs to be brought over to the go-to-market team in that same way.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's so true. Just speaking in plain English and not sometimes the jargon, like, yeah, that standardizes it across marketing teams. The same with within a given company. Sometimes companies can take on their own jargon, or an industry can take on jargon. And it's okay if that buyer or that prospect or current customer understands that, but why should they? Why should they have to unpack the jargon? So I also see this move as companies are moving towards quality over quantity, less is more, simple, like just get to the point. We're even seeing that you mentioned before on writing and content. There's a place for long form, and SEO loves long form. And in certain technical audiences, of course, and if someone wants more in-depth information, but
Yeah.
sometimes short and crisp and to the point is all someone needs. And you can layer it, click here for more, that type of thing, and just make it easy and simple. And your buyer doesn't have to be an expert in three-letter acronyms or jargon, as you said.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Like you're really touching on, I think, one of your primary areas of expertise, which is developing a message and helping a company develop a brand. Can you talk to me a little bit more about maybe some of like an overview of the method that you follow? What are some of the important things that you make sure are done to help a company identify their brand and then articulate it?
Sure. Sometimes companies think, well, it can either focus on brand for marketing or on the performance metrics. You need both, right? You need the
Yeah.
brand to tell the story about why you're different, what's important. And then the go to market plays that really help bring together all of these different messages out to the market that resonate and then measure those, right?
Mhm.
And so I always look first at the positioning. So getting a really clear understanding about who you're targeting, what problem the company is solving, and then how are you able to do that better than what's out there on the market, what the customer is currently using? Because maybe it's good enough what they're using. So really understanding those pain points, how you solve those, and then how you're different. Once that's clear, then you can move to messaging. And then I work with companies to create a messaging framework, a messaging matrix, so that everyone's on the same page. And then those can tie into different go to market plays, such as whether it's event marketing, maybe it's an email campaign, it could just be an update to the website, but then all of that's going to connect and have, let's say, different formats of the messaging, but all of that rolls back to the unique positioning, how the company's solving problems, and why will this resonate with that particular buyer or that persona, as we call it, that job title, let's say.
Yeah, most B2B purchases are done by teams, right? And so you've got to
Hmm.
understand the overall brand positioning for the company, but then that messaging strategy is going to help to deliver on the pain points for the job roles. Like you might have 5
Right.
job roles who are part of the decision-making process, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's really important to look at exposing some of those job titles to the wider message too, because this is the part for the CFO that it's just only numerical. But of course, the CFO wants to understand, how does this solve the problem? And they want to make sure that, let's say this is a long-term solution and they won't have to replace it in a year. We of course are going to want a holistic view, but then yeah, addressing specific pain points, ROI and the financials is appropriate, but not getting too laser focused and missing, let's say, what's the value prop? Because any of the stakeholders will need that at some level.
Yeah. I think that positioning too, it becomes such a huge sales tool. right? There is so much need for training and reinforcing with the salespeople or the business development reps who are out there actually on the front lines talking to your customers. If they don't have a standardized message that represents the brand as a whole, they're going to make it up. And they're not going to make it up because they're irresponsible. They have to have something to say, right? So having that brand platform is just, it's so helpful for every part of the go to market team.
It's such a good point. Otherwise, they'll take their own perspective and their own experience from it. And that could vary regionally. It could depend if they're, let's say, in the technical part of the organization or are they on the front line? How many customers have they dealt with? It should be, again, really simple so that it's coming out consistently from the company and that it's something that resonates. I see this over and over, though, that companies are quick to, let's say, get into all of the different go to market plays, but then have they really taken a moment to refresh on what that positioning is, especially if they're looking to enter adjacent markets, whether that's adjacent verticals, launch new products, or even appeal to a different, let's say, segment or job title or persona with their existing product line. It's really important to get back to some of those basics and then refresh compared to what is competition doing, what are some of the substitute technologies and disruptors that are out there. Whether it's a product or a service, it's really the same methodology and the same approach.
Yeah, it's a critical step. You can spend a lot of money putting marketing communications and getting out into those different channels and waste a lot of valuable resources if you don't have that message and the positioning nailed down first so
Mm.
that when you're going to market, there's so many variables that you've got to track and adjust. And what you don't want to have to adjust is that main message. When you go out into the market, you want to have a solid position on that so that that can stay consistent and you can try like,
Mhm.
oh, maybe we didn't have the right call to action at the end, or maybe we didn't target the right keywords with our ads, or maybe we had the job
Mhm.
titles off in our LinkedIn ads. There's already enough variables to try to adjust and A/B test. And so that message, I think, is just critical.
Yeah, well said. I mean, the testing is so important because you want to isolate, test a couple of things, see what's working, not just completely reinvent, because you want to be able to look at what is working and resonating. And there's nothing wrong with too just asking people. I know we have all these digital tools and everything's done, but one of my favorite books, Nail It Then Scale It, where you get like a smaller group. It's not just back to focus groups, but it can even be one or two clients for that discovery process, get their
Mhm.
feedback, adjust from there, and then just adjusting as you go, just being willing to be open to feedback.
I want to shift gears and talk about budgeting. So, because you're in an executive consulting and business advisory role, when you first start engaging with a company and they're like, okay, we want to market, we want to grow, we want to grow more leads, we need to build our brand awareness.
Mhm.
When it comes to the topic of budgeting, tell me how you coach your clients through a budget cycle of planning, how to allocate the right amount. Maybe just give us some tidbits and highlights of that process.
It's such an important process. It's great to see how many companies have started engaging that much earlier, September, October, to really get ready. So it's not just a reactive. But I always look at what has been the trend the last couple of years. If they're in a huge growth cycle, maybe it's changing so dramatically, it's hard to necessarily have let's say trends. But
Mhm.
really looking at what's worked, what hasn't worked, where are they investing, and then part of my role is to help look at some cost savings and then reinvestment in new areas just to make sure that they're looking at, let's say, newest technologies, what can help simplify, again, coming back to that workflow so that they're automating where possible. And sometimes it goes the other way where companies have so many tools, it's almost like an overwhelm to people within the teams, right? So sometimes that's where the less is more comes in that is it really adding that much more value? And maybe it is, but it just shouldn't be a given year on year for each of those. And then looking at expertise as well. So are there gaps in the team? Maybe there's some contracts that could help them bringing in like an SEO expert or somebody, let's say, to help with peak events, or there's just really busy times that can actually be a huge cost savings rather than taking on another full-time headcount or working with an agency. I often bring in agencies as part of what I do. And
Mhm.
so it's looking holistically at what's working, what are the goals, and not just marketing goals, what are the company goals? What is it that they're trying to achieve? And then really mapping against that and then looking for that ROI. but I almost always find ways to help either shift dollars, save costs, or just spend it more strategically so that definitely they're going to see that impact. And then making it a collaborative process. So it's not just only marketing talking this through, but sales, marketing, really part of that overall company goal. Because what marketing drives is going to have an impact across the company. And then that's where it's more of that orchestrated go to market. And so we talked in the beginning about multiple teams coming together. Well, the same is true on budgets. It can't just be, well, marketing's going to spend this, sales is going to spend this. Some of that has to be looked at together
Yeah.
as one bucket so that the teams are collaborating as well.
Yeah.
And then they're going to get some results together.
Yeah. I completely agree about that. We see from time to time that there are activities happening and investments happening in those different groups that are either working against each other unintentionally, or
Yeah.
they're like double paying for many of the similar services or functions. And so the more they can bring that together and evaluate it, they're going to just make better use of that overall budget. Do you run into that same kind of thing?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and especially on tech, right? Because there's been some overlap there, and just looking at roles in tech where there's overlap, and then just saying, like, look, we're all going for the same goal here, and then aligning the teams, but then aligning the budget to make it work. So, for like one good example is if there's a problem with the data and it's just really frustrating, they have to spend a lot of time manually updating it, taking a step back to look at, okay, what can we work on together for some data governance, some quick rules of the road that's going to help and not create more manual work. And then that's going to save because better data will come about, less manual work, less frustration. So maybe it's bringing a person in to help with that. Maybe it's a tool, or is it just a process change? So it's being open to look at what is the right solution. But usually teams are able to identify where some of those pain points are. Then it's a matter of looking at some of the options.
If a company comes to you and says, "We just don't know if we're spending," right? Because I think what we're talking a lot about is allocation, and that's a huge
Hmm.
pain point for businesses who are trying to manage their go-to-market budget is we have X dollars, but we don't really know how to allocate it and set priorities. And I just read an article or went to a seminar that talked about this one strategy, and that kind of tends to drive you towards that one strategy versus, is that really the right thing? Let's step back and look at this holistically. So I think allocation is a huge area, but just knowing, like, what should I allocate? What number? What is appropriate? Because you don't want to overspend, no doubt, but
Yeah.
you also don't want to underspend. You want to make sure you've got enough allocated. How do you guide someone or help someone when they're asking themselves those types of questions about their business?
Yeah, sometimes it can happen where companies are underspending because maybe they don't fully understand what's possible, and that actually some money spent upfront being able to communicate the brand, a few really important thought leadership pieces can go a long way. Just getting the name out so you're not having to spend so much time trying to even get into the bid process or get your name recognized, right? And
Yeah.
so there's definitely percentages where benchmarks to be able to look at. Depends on company size. So definitely always work on that as a starting point, looking at what are the average spend, always benchmarking too. What are your competitors doing? How are they visible? Doesn't mean you have to do the exact same thing. In fact, it's obviously better to follow your own brand
Yeah.
and your own way to communicate, but it's still being eyes wide open on what that looks like, what's resonating with customers, and then just being able to look at it differently too, of like a more innovative approach to reaching. So I think I'll give you an example. For so long, it was all about like industry events, right? And it's
Yeah.
still in a lot of industries, that's really important. But then you see some companies going more towards, let's say, an invite only dinner type thing to really have a little bit more intimate feel, bring in a speaker. So that's an example of an event go to market motion where it's just a different approach, and that may or may not work for one company, but it could be greatly successful for another. Another one is some companies are just getting fatigued from like the cold calling, right? And they're saying, no, I'm going to go more, and they'll institute, let's say they'll create more of a partnership go to market play, which is we're going to route these types of deals through partners, and they'll set up a partner strategy, or they'll have a referral program. So there's all kinds of clever ways, but really being able to look at it more holistically and saying,
Yeah.
okay, who am I trying to reach? Where do they hang out? And then does my company have the means or the channel to be able to reach them? Or is there a different way to be able to do that? So that's another way to be able to look at budget and spend is not only allocation, but what would it take to have a more innovative approach, such as like a partner strategy, a new event strategy, or just a different way to be able to reach your ideal customer.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, that is really helpful. That's great insight. What what are one of the points I previewed at the beginning, which is best practices for go-to-market strategies? I think we touched on a lot of them, right? But I'm curious if there are maybe some others that we haven't covered yet. Like we talked about branding, positioning, tools, analytics,
Yeah.
budgeting. What are some of the other best practices that you like to have as part of your solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most critical is getting that understanding and keeping it current about what is on the mind of customers and prospects and how the market's changing. And
Yeah.
that's the entire leadership team, but that's also across the company. So it's not just marketing or sales job to be on top of that. Then internal plays, even for a small company, to make sure everybody's in tune with what that's about. I think the discovery process and even if it's small questionnaires or just staying current, getting out there, talking to customers, just always having a pulse on the market. I mean, that can't be replaced by AI.
Yeah.
Just really being in touch with that is one. And that kind of leads into another, which is around being human, right? So you talked before about how much can be done through AI, but it's just remembering the human side of business. And then thinking about not just the tactical and like what's here today, but
Mhm.
thinking the 2 years out, the 3 years out, where you want to be. And then are these motions, are these investments really getting you towards that? For example, it could be investing in a slightly adjacent market, it could be expanding the service line or the product line. But those are some best practices. It's not just thinking about today, but thinking the 2 to 3 years out, close customer contact with a pulse on the market. Also the changing needs and the changing technology. So then looking out as to what else is changing around you, not just being isolated within your own industry. A lot of times disruption happens because it comes in from another industry or it comes in from a completely different perspective. So
Yeah.
having that broader view around it. So I think that's what makes it exciting with all the data out there and different forums. I think there's more interest than ever to get close to some of these areas, to
Yeah.
be human, let the technology do its thing. So yeah, those are some of the best practices I would absolutely recommend.
One of the reasons I was really excited to have you on as a guest is because of your SaaS and tech industry experience. What those industries have done really well with their go to market strategies is they've developed a level of sophistication and best practices that are just expected from the go to market teams now. And it's so data driven and so rigorous and disciplined. A lot of our clients are in the B2B, industrial, manufacturing, construction. And I'm
Mhm.
really hoping that more of that rigor and actual structure starts to get adopted and integrated into these other industries where it's not commonly seen. I think those industries are very sales driven for very good reason, right? It's all about building relationships and building trust and being accountable. But I do think that what modern go to market strategies can add on to that just makes that relationship building more intelligent and it's done in a more prioritized and like strategic way so that you're driving towards things. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love how you packaged that up because it's well said. I've also worked in manufacturing and it definitely is a relationship driven. Trust, quality is absolutely essential. Selecting vendor management, supplier management. And I agree, there's absolutely an opportunity for a little more on the tech and the automation side beyond what's being automated, let's say within manufacturing, but from the marketing. But at the same time, I feel like the SaaS and the tech world could benefit from some of that relationship and the human side, right? So there's some cross learnings both ways. But yeah, and I see that too, like certain industries just haven't adopted as quickly some of the tech. And it
Mhm.
also depends on volume, right? Like if you're just dealing with a smaller number of clients that you go really deep, maybe it hasn't forced as much of that automation compared to, let's say, in the consumer world where everything's driven by numbers and clicks and just a lot different metrics than you would see in B2B. But it's a good contrast in terms of, let's say, manufacturing from SaaS. And yeah, absolutely some learnings that can go both ways.
Yeah. Well, you also just said something else that I think is really key. It ties back to many things you commented on during the interview, but like really understanding your audience and what they need, right?
Oh,
And then what's the best way to get in front of them? Because if you've got a go to market strategy with an audience size of 50,000, or you have an audience size of 500 who makes a very high average purchase price, you probably don't want the same strategy for those two scenarios, right? You still have to have a message, you still got to have a website and a solid foundation, but the way that you might choose to reach them and build those relationships and then go about nurturing those relationships could look very different. And I think that's also
Yeah.
important to understand is there in the digital marketing space, there isn't a one size fits all, right? There's so many ways to adjust what you're doing, and it has to be all about the customer, like what's going to serve the customer and get them engaged.
That's exactly it. I mean, there are so many ways, and that's where I think sometimes companies they just really chase after what's the latest trend and oh, we
Yeah.
have to be out on the social media platform. But maybe not. It really depends again if your ideal customer is out there or is it going to be is it a much smaller, more of a niche type market and then it's more relationships, more face to face. And then it becomes more business development. So, for example, as if it's a manufactured product, creating something that maybe they're in on the first prototype, or if it's a new service line, maybe having a roundtable with them or brainstorm under an NDA to discuss some ideas
Mm.
that could go into it. There's that opportunity to bring some of these marquee customers into the fold, into some of the developments to weigh in much earlier that are just more difficult to facilitate with something where it's more of a mass
Yeah.
product, whether or service, whether it's B2B or B2C. But taking advantage sometimes of those smaller forums, having a more intimate relation and baking in some of that expertise as you go can
Yeah.
be a really
Well,
powerful thing.
I mean, I feel like, Heidi, you're really hitting on the value of working with somebody that has a lot of experience in this field is as marketers, we have to have like this whole like toolbox and we have to know when it's time to pull out tool A, tool B, tool C, all three, right? And how they get used
Yeah.
together. Like that comes with time and experience. And of course, we have to keep up with new tools that get added and we have to throw those into our toolbox as well. But I think working with someone like you that has a variety of experiences and knows when it's time to pull out different tools shouldn't be overlooked, right? Especially as like a consultant and to engage someone as a consultant to take that approach and then the way that that gets resourced and implemented could be handled completely differently, right?
Well, first, thank you, Terry. No, I appreciate just you saying and recognizing. I mean, I think sometimes people hear consultant and they just think it's like, oh, someone's going to give me advice and hope it works. But it's actually an extension of the team. So what's exciting now is that companies can outsource for expertise. It could be for implementation. It can be for both. And so, like for me, I'll come in. I'll be able to work together with the leadership team, but then I'm also working on implementation. So whether it's things I'm doing myself or I'm bringing in others or working with the company's team, the idea is that it's a supplement to what they're doing. It's bringing in an expertise and someone that can hit the ground running and really be part of that story and help them in client facing work as well.
Yeah.
And I think because it's fractional, I mean, it's not the same as hiring someone to bring in full time and then maybe the needs change a year down the road. And that's like the beauty of it now. There's so many more choices for bringing in expertise like this. And it's you mentioned before about budgeting. I mean, it can be really a key strategic investment because it's really saving the company money in other ways.
Yeah.
And also just the return that you get by accelerating, but then also hitting that right ROI, bringing in the business that you wanted to bring in and having that more robust thought leadership and polished messaging out there. That's what I think is exciting. That's why I just really enjoy working with the clients that I do.
Yeah. You can tell. That definitely shines through as you're talking about your work. That definitely is clear. What are some other things that you're seeing in the market? Are there other things you're hearing from your clients, other trends you're seeing in the market that you want to add in as we come to the end of the interview?
Yeah, we talked a lot about AI. It's
Mhm.
something that ties to AI and as well just marketing trends in general is companies are really coming down to like what's real, what's actually working, separating out the hype. So they're probably not going to be doing like these massive big email campaigns. It's going to be targeted. It's going to have a specific purpose. AI, same with the POCs going on for that. It's going to have a specific purpose, measurable results, and then they'll make the investments accordingly. So
Yeah.
that's something that we're seeing. Automation where it makes sense. So again, let's free up teams. I think there's recognition that people have been really overloaded and overstretched. So making the best bets and the best investments and maybe not doing everything like before. So it's all about what's real, quality over quantity, just having a better integration and smooth running machine, being in touch, as I mentioned before, with what the market wants, where things are going, and then just being ready to evolve. So looking ahead, not just only focus on today's fire, today's urgency, but like, for example, bringing on board a new client, really understanding where does that customer want to be in 2 years and helping your customer with their customers. And then in seeing that success, being able to pivot, move on, and adapt. I mean, I think the adaptability is more key than ever. But I am definitely seeing companies coming back to the core, what they're really good at, and then looking at, let's say, partnerships, outsourcing, other ways so that there's just not this constant feeling of being overwhelmed, but instead just being proactive on the front foot, leveraging expertise, leveraging technology, and just coming across having a really solid story and reaping the rewards.
Yeah.
It's a great formula, and I'm really happy to be out there supporting that.
I love how you made all of that sound like so easy too. One of my favorite things to talk about in the marketing world is that your marketing, and I'm talking about marketing, but this is true for the whole go to market team, right? You've got to be able to think and operate strategically. You've got to be able to
Mhm.
execute tactically. You've got to be creative, but you also have to have like a strong technical capability with all of the tools that we have to use. And that's not just like how to post on LinkedIn. That's in the weeds of an example on the technical side, but
Yeah.
like you have to figure out how to keep that all together and weigh and balance and prioritize and figure out how to allocate time and resources across all of that. It's a very challenging position and role, but I think very often skipped and missed. And people just want to jump straight to doing and getting the activity back. But making
Mhm.
sure that you've got the right strategy in place, I think is critical. It's a huge balancing act though.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I feel like there's that saying that every company's technical now. I feel like the biggest trend we've seen over the last few years is that business teams are becoming more technical. So it's no longer okay to just leave that to IT or leave that to technology. And at the same time, technology teams are having to become more business savvy and really understanding the business so that they know the context and that they can be more powerful. So each
Yeah.
person in each role still has their core function. I don't think they're losing that, but it's really a compliment because it helps them bridge that. And then again, it comes back to what we talked about on go to market. Instead of things being done in serial, it means it can be done more collaboratively, more together, absolutely accelerating time. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm excited too. I've always had a technical interest and always worked in technology. So to see this becoming more mainstream is great. I've got two patents that I'm proud of, and I think being able to delve into the technology side, but with a business purpose and having it serve a purpose that way is exciting. But just to see how far companies have come, being able to have a view on both goes a
I
long
can't believe
way.
that we just got all the way to the tail end of this interview and you're like, "Oh, by the way, I have 2 patents that I'm really proud of."
Yeah. I mean, it's
Minor
just
little thing.
yeah, yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah.
No,
That
but it's really about, like, inventing and building, and I think that's something that is just really great about not only entrepreneurship, but what companies are up to, is that they
yeah,
can reinvent themselves, they can build on past successes, and they can be able to take it forward. So, I think we're gonna continue to see that convergence and people switching roles, let's say, within a company because of having that knowledge of a market, knowledge of the business, and being able to play different roles. So, and
right.
it's good for talent, it's good for growth, it's good for everyone.
Yeah, that, well-rounded growth mindset, I think is really
Growth
important for
mindset
people.
for sure.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple of fun questions at the end. I'm not gonna ask you about go-to-market strategies anymore. If you're open to these
Okay.
questions,
That's fun too, though. So,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm gonna well, that's
Mhm.
true. I kind of love nerding out over that stuff, so I agree. What is your do you have a like a business book or actually it doesn't even have to be a business book, but do you have a book that you find yourself recommending or even like sending to people over and over? What's one of your favorites?
Yeah, I think the whole lean startup is really good. It's just that whole lean approach melded into what businesses can do to iterate. I
Mhm.
mentioned before about nail it, then scale it, that
Mhm.
type of mindset, certainly around growth mindset. I think those are some key areas where it just talks about being able to build, being able to grow. So those are a few that I would definitely recommend.
Okay, those are great. I'll add those to my list.
Yeah.
I love my podcast because I get to build my reading list by asking that
Yeah.
question at the end. It's fun.
There's other ones too. I feel like I always love like Atomic Habits,
Oh,
things like that, where it's like, oh, it's getting like cool little tricks and hacks. And so I think that type of book, Essentialism,
mhm.
those are really good too, because it gives you clarity and focus. Each one kind of gives you a different perspective.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I could go on though. I love different podcasts. So yeah,
Oh,
that's why I'm on this, right? I mean, I
yeah.
love the work that you're doing too. Just giving that lens for marketing and go to market.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
important.
What's the best vacation
Mm.
you've ever taken?
Oh my gosh, so many. So I lived overseas for 11 years. I worked in Spain and in the UK. I did a ton of travel for
Wow.
business, but then also just for leisure. And one of the best is just African safari. I mean, I think going to Kenya, Tanzania, Botswana, and seeing the animals in their natural habitat is just amazing. It's just really humbling. It also gets you out of being in front of computers all day and in industry. It's just a way to like unwind and step back. So yeah, I would say that's good. I Another good one though that I've done is the ice hotel in Sweden. So it's like north of the
Oh,
Arctic Circle. And just
yes.
being able to, it sounds crazy, especially for someone who's living in a warm climate, but just being able to like, I don't know, just the having no sound other than being in this literally this ice and snow igloo was
Wow.
amazing, and just doing the dog sledding and snowmobiling, all those different activities. So that was also yeah, so I think the nature is really that common theme. I love
Yeah.
boating and I've got my sailing skipper's license. So definitely nature. I
Wow,
think nature
cool.
is really good. So
That's such a fun list of things you had there. And then my
yeah.
last one is, what is your favorite job you've ever had?
Oh, I mean, I just feel like every single role I've had has just brought something, you know what I mean? It's so yeah, I've just been really fortunate just to be all of these different roles and different jobs. So yeah, it's hard to put a finger on any one. I would just say maybe this is the best because now taking like a whole career of experience different places and being able to wrap it up and package it up for companies. So maybe I'm a little biased, but this is probably the best.
Well, I think that's a really good way to wrap up our conversation. I have to tell you that that was gonna be the obvious answer to me because it's so clear how passionate you are about what you do and how important it is to you to
Oh, thank you.
actually, put together solutions that work for your clients and then bring them success. It's just your passion definitely comes through, and I think it's really cool. So, congratulations on where you've arrived with your career, and again, thank you so much for spending some time in this interview today. I think there's a lot of really great nuggets for our listeners, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Terry. It's just been great. I mean, I feel like the time flew and just so many great topics that we can cover together. And I just love the work you're doing. So, again, thanks for having me on. And yeah, just a lot of great things out there.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you for listening to B2B Marketing Methods. Please be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you and connect. You can find me on LinkedIn or visit our company website at marketingrefresh.com.